So it's a great honor for me tonight to introduce my coworker, someone I worked with for 18 years. It's kind of a little bit emotional for me. Time goes by so fast, and actually Sue Ann goes back even farther than that. She started almost 30 years ago working for the anthropology department, and has been a very, very important team member of this great staff over the years. And it's changed since she first started back in 1990.
Big changes.
So at this time, let me go ahead and introduce her here more formally. As I said, I've worked with Sue Ann for 18 years. She is the museum registrar, one of the most important positions in any museum, and particularly this museum. She has a great passion for basketry and textiles, and I know that from working with her for all these years, and has studied native plants used for textiles, taken and taught numerous basketry classes with Native American and non-Native weavers, and is herself a proficient weaver. I know she's given me a couple gifts over the years for Christmas, so we have those at our home. And then to finish up here, she has spent over 20 years studying the museum's world-class basketry collection and researching Datsalali. So at this point, let me turn over the program to Sue Ann Montalino.
Hello, thank you. And remember, Bob's been here longer than me. So I'm happy to give this presentation tonight. I want to say I try to look at this from a basket weaver's point of view and try to get as many history facts correct at the same time. A lot of people have been studying Datsalali for a long time, of course, but in the last 30 years, it's become more apparent that some of what you've read in the old publications was very colorful. So, so this will be different than that, and we can discuss some of those issues afterwards. And I guess I'll start. So this is one of her pretty baskets, LK28, LK for Louisa Kaiser, her English name, made in 1901, and it's called Happy Homes. We'll get to all that stuff about titles. So this presentation is about how some of the world's most beautiful baskets came to be made by a Native American woman of great artistic genius. In the 19th century, the arts and crafts movement began in Britain and spread over to North America in the late 19th century. And it promoted traditional craftsmanship over industrialized manufacture of art and architecture and decorative arts. If you think about the Craftsman bungalows and Frank Lloyd Wright, that period of wonderful pottery and beautiful handmade decorations, people were wanting that in their homes. So between about 1880 and 1920, the search for natural and functional art forms led to greater appreciation of Native American basketry. And Washoe weavers right here, the Washoe people were up at Lake Tahoe and spread up to just to Sierra Valley and down to around Topaz Lake. And so this region is their region. We are in Washoe territory. So Washoe weavers were among the leaders in this changing art form, and Datsalali the most famous of them. Throughout the western US, the development of the railroads encouraged travel by middle class and upper class people. Tourism with a capital T kind of began in this time, I think, creating markets for native crafts. So people were taking trips and stopping at those Santa Fe railroad stations and things like that you see in the Southwest and buying wonderful native arts. Here in Nevada, the success in mining and business provided expendable income for even working class people, and certainly the upper middle class, to join in the collecting craze. And summering at Tahoe became very common for San Francisco residents and families. They would come, spend the summer, and the native weavers would set up a stand, and shop owners, other business shop owners and traders took advantage of this time when so many people were fascinated with this type of work. Oop. So this is probably the earliest photo of Datsalali. It's 1899, we believe, and she's seated with her stirring stick across her lap. That's for stirring for cooking acorn soup and other things, holding a walking stick. And her early baskets are arrayed around her feet. In about 1895, she was working as domestic help for the family of Abe Cohn, who ran the Emporium Company, a clothing store in Carson City. Abe and his wife Amy were interested in expanding into this curio market, and that was becoming so popular and lucrative in California. So Louisa Kaiser showed them some of her well-made baskets, and they decided to encourage her to make baskets for them to sell. Eventually, they developed that into an exclusive arrangement in which she only was supposed to weave only for them, and they could sell them through their store. And they provided her food, clothing, housing, medical care, and also for her husband, Charlie Kaiser. And she was able to collect tips from tourists who watched her demonstrate, and also supposedly received a bonus whenever a basket was sold. That's from a document that we have in our collections. I haven't seen it anywhere else, and I don't know what percentage they might have given her. And in some ways, yes, she was a working servant for them, producing for them, and them making the big profit. But compared to other Washoe weavers, she had a lot of advantages, and that patronage allowed her to spend her time and focus on the baskets and not have to do all the house cleaning and laundry and baby care that her sisters and cousins and all were doing. This is a kind of a staged photo by A. Smith. He was a significant photographer in Carson City, and this is some of the collection at the Emporium store, the Cohn's Emporium store, and some of Datsalali's are in this. Let me see. There are a few of her baskets in there, and then her photo is the focus of the picture, the center. That one with the, let's go back. You can see the one with the pedestal. There's that one. Is it the same one? I think it is. And that is at the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I got to see it a few years ago. It was pretty neat. So she was probably born around 1850. Just based on photographs of her and natural aging and how life expectancies and things like that. The Cohns made up interesting stories, and they promoted her as being born around 1840, so that she supposedly may have seen Fremont passing through Nevada. But in fact, she probably was born after that. But she was born, and she was a child before the Euro-Americans and whites came into her land so much. So she saw it all. She became known as Datsalali as she was becoming a famous weaver, and it's possibly an adaptation of a Washoe name, or it may have been invented by the Cones, and that's still under consideration. This is an example of a prehistoric coiled basket from the Great Basin. And it shows that even anciently, baskets were were decorated with geometric designs of sunburned willow. It's a technique of darkening the willow thread that the basket is woven with. And it's a traditional shape. It's an open, flared basket that you can put things in, or you can cook things or serve things. This is a small traditional Washoe basket, which could have been used for cooking or for serving food and things. So traditional Washoe baskets were more of this shape, and they were used for storage, cooking, serving food, and for their girls' ceremony. And most were decorated. Because coiled baskets, the baskets that you're using for cooking and serving, seem to often be decorated. This one was made by a woman named Lizzie, and it was purchased by Dr. Lee in 1898. Dr. Lee was an amazing collector here in Carson City, and he collected everything from fossils to minerals to coins to baskets. He is the basis of our collection, and fancy European porcelain, just beautiful things, and just a huge collection. His collection was given to the state after his death around 1925, and when this museum formed, then the state put the collection in our collection. So we have his guns, we have everything here. So a few of the Datsalalis and a lot of Washoe baskets are his. So we're back to Datsalali again. It shows that she was doing some traditional shapes, but was already experimenting with the new shapes. At the Emporium, she saw all those baskets all around her, and she saw Pomo and Maidu gift baskets from Northern California, which tended to be rounded, smaller at the mouth. And she developed shapes and designs more like those, since those were clearly selling better. And she introduced the Degikup shape around 1896. That's that rounded, this globular rounded shape. And through the years, she worked with it, enlarging it, having it wider near the top, wider near the bottom, widest in the middle. But they're very globular. This one is one of Dr. Lee's and made in 1901. In about 1897, she introduced superfine weaving to Washoe basketry, increasing the stitches. That one had about 7 strips of willow to the inch. This one has at least 12 or more, they came up to 20 to 30 stitches per inch sewn along the coil of the basket. We'll talk a little bit more about the baskets in a minute. So this is LK28, and it's an early example of the superfine stitching in 1901. And it's called Happy Homes, was the one at the beginning. There's a detail of the designs and a close detail of the stitches. Those are, as I recall, they are like a 1/16 or less of an inch wide, each of those little strips of willow. The success of Dotsolali's work influenced other weavers, and the Daguerreotype shape and fine weaving dominated Washoe weaving until 1910, by 1910, I'm sorry. So what she was doing and the success that the Cones were having selling her products, the other Washoe weavers noticed this and started imitating that. It's not like they weren't great weavers themselves, but they could see that this was selling, so they started producing really fine basketry also. So this is a photo of her around 1900 working. So how did she make these wonderful baskets? This is a photo in our collection of her materials that were kept by the Cones just after she passed away, I believe. So she's got a bundle of willow sticks, bundles of willow thread, redbud thread over here on the left side. I believe there's bracken fern root on the lower left. And on the right are two beginnings of baskets, two flat round bottoms of baskets, which are also in our collections. This is the fancy one. And it's wonderful to have it because all her baskets are finished and almost perfect, and only one of the completed ones has any breaks in it. That's how good a shape they're still in. This one, because it wasn't finished, you can see how many willow rods she used to make her coil, and a lot of details can be studied just from this sample. So she gathered willow shoots in the fall after the leaves fell and peeled some for whole rods, like these white rods here. The peeled rods, fine peeled rods, became the base of her coil, her spiral that formed the baskets. And others were split in 3 parts to form thread. So first you split it 3 ways. You go out and you gather a willow stick. And it has bark on it still. And you split it by making some notches in the top and holding 2 parts with your fingers and 1 part with your mouth, and you split it in thirds. And then each of those thirds you have to thin out the pith on the inside. And then you roll it up and let it dry for a while, and then you peel the bark off the outside, and you thin it down some more, and you end up with lovely ribbon-like pieces to weave with. She may have been, I can't remember why I have this, and I haven't found a record of it. It's my understanding that she had the back of a watch with holes through it to size her willow thread, but I can't find that written anywhere these days. But she may have been the first to do that kind of careful, even sizing of her willows. And so then this is just a 1-rod sample, and she would usually have 3 of these small rods that she was sewing around. And she would take her awl and insert it, make it a little opening, and then press the willow thread through. It's a very time-consuming process, and you have to be very careful that you don't break all the stitches that you just made. And then working that design in, we'll get to that along the way too, but think about how you can weave a plain willow start as far as you can go, but once you want to design, you have to know what you're going to build the rest of the basket, what the rest of the design is going to be. So once you start with a color of redbud or bracken fern root, you have to be committed and keep it all even and perfect. Let me go back to that. So the redbud grows on the western side of the Sierra, and Dotzalali would have had to trade for that since it does not grow on this side. But she had bracken fern root at least up around Lake Tahoe that she could dig, and then it's got a brown center, and she would have dyed that to a dark black. In the old days, there would have been a spring that had iron clay around it, and once the Americans got there were tin cans that rusted, and you could coil up your willow in there and dye it all up. Well, dye your bracken fern darker in that. She would have needed a lot of materials for the quantity of baskets she produced. She probably had help from her husband, family, and friends to cut the willow and dig the bracken fern root. But she most likely did all the splitting and trimming herself because she would have wanted them all to be absolutely consistent and perfect. So this is one of the certificates identifying her baskets. The Cones created this system of creating a certificate for each basket, giving it each a number, putting a little sticker on the bottom of the basket, a little red bordered sticker with the number on. And they got her handprint done through the, I can't read it from here. It's the system that was used for prison identification. And I've often wondered if they got with the territorial, or not the state prison by that time, and had her handprint done there. But every basket was accompanied by this certificate and her handprint. The Cones continued to promote Dotzalali's work. They provided documentation to the buyers in these certificates. And each basket after about 1900 had the distinctive label from the Emporium on the bottom. They promoted her work as art, and they named each piece, promoting her as an individual artist, and they created a considerable mythology about her and the designs that she created. They said she was a princess, that the baskets were for ceremonial purposes, that she was 20 years older than she probably was. Many such things that are improbable and uncorroborated. And Dr. Marvin Cohodes has done considerable research over the past 30 years and has refuted most of those. He has interviewed descendants of Amy Cone's family and others, and worked out quite a lot of details about Dotzalali's life also. So this is the Emporium in Carson City. This is probably not the first location. This is probably later. This is not far from, this is the southwest corner of the Nugget there. That's about where that is, next to the Laxalt building. This is what the interior looked like part of the time. There are Dotzalali baskets in this photo too. It's very hard to see from this side. But you can see what other styles of baskets she was seeing around her, things that influenced her design work. So the Cones decided to open a second shop up at Lake Tahoe, near the where the Truckee comes out, near kind of where the Gatekeepers Museum is, I believe. And they called it the Bicose, which is the Washoe word for cradle basket. And they began creating souvenir postcards. And they posed Datsalali standing between her baskets, and Datsalali sitting between her baskets. And I like this one better. It's her actually sitting and working and with her baskets around her. On the left, at her side, she's got her pan of water, since all the materials have to be damp and soft and ready to be flexible. So it's a very real picture. This is another of their advertisements. And around 1916, the Cones built a small frame house next to theirs for Datsalali and her husband Charlie to live in. In that way, she had place for her materials and a place to enjoy the company of her friends that wasn't within someone else's house. And their house is still, both houses are still here at between Division and Nevada on Proctor Street. This photo is near there. It doesn't seem to be exactly that house. I'm not sure which house it is, but it's Datsalali and her husband Charlie. And baskets, a few of which, like the water bottle, are probably not made by Datsalali. And the two young ladies could be family, especially Charlie had a previous marriage with children. They may be grandchildren age by this time. But it's my understanding that she took in some children to help. They took family members with them up to the lake in the summer sometimes. And she probably taught other people to weave, but it's not clear at this point. There's probably a lot more research to do. Around 1918, Amy Cone compiled all the information from the certificates into a ledger of LK baskets. And this is the one that we have here at this museum. And she made a second copy that's at the Historical Society in Reno. I don't know if you can read anything on there. From this angle, I can't. In 1919, the Cones took Datsalali to the St. Louis Exposition of Industrial Arts and Crafts to demonstrate and sell baskets. This is a perfect arts and crafts movement event. They've got at least 2 other native weavers or rug weavers and other, it's pottery also, and also woodworking and other fine things. But Datsalali is the centerpiece and the St. Louis paper. I'll go back to that. So Amy Cone, who had been the big promoter and wrote articles and went on speaking tours, she died in December of 1919 at about the age of 60, soon after the trip to St. Louis. And Abe remarried about a year later to a woman named Margaret. Interestingly, Abe Cone was probably of Jewish heritage, and both his wives weren't, and both his wives had children, and he apparently never had any children of his own, but helped raise his wife's children. So it's kind of interesting. He was also a Mason, and they gave him a fancy funeral later on when he passed away. So Margaret continued to maintain the ledger and helped with the store and basket sales, and they updated the Emporium name to the Kit Carson Curio Store, and this is a postcard, I believe, with her signature on it. And I believe that is Abe and Margaret in the picture. And I don't know the source of this. It ended up in my files, and I have to track down who it came from. And Abe still loved to show off the Datsalali baskets a lot. This is behind the store in 1924. He closed the Bicos at Tahoe after Amy's death, but continued to promote Datsalali's work. And photographer Edward Curtis came to Carson City in 1925, photographed groupings of Datsalali baskets, and also another significant Washoe weaver, Tootsie Dick. Those were the two groupings that the Cones put out for him to take photos of. And you can see that the sepia tone is a shot of Curtis's photo, which our curator of anthropology has gotten a nice copy for the collections. And the Cones promoted this other postcard in the lower right. They used it in their sales, and I have not figured out if it was taken by Edward Curtis or if they set it up and rearranged and took the photo themselves. So it's kind of fun. Who knows about the copyright issues on that? So they were still using all this in marketing. And Curtis also took this famous photo of Datsalali. People have used this and drawn it in artistic renderings over and over again. So it's pretty famous. This is possibly about the last photo of Datsalali. She passed away in 1925. But even after she'd passed, Abe was promoting baskets. This is a 1931 article in the Standard Oil Bulletin. So Abe passed away in 1934, and Margaret maintained their collection until 1945, when she sold kind of the remaining 20 baskets to the state of Nevada. There's legislation, you can read the statutes that they passed, that they would agree to buy these 20 baskets for $1,500. In 1914, one of her baskets sold to a man named Steiner from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, for close to $2,000, which was a lot of money in 1914. And now, of course, her baskets are worth $500,000 or more each. So $1,500 was quite a steal by the state of Nevada. And they split them up, 10 to our museum, which had so she did that in 1945. I believe that around 1920, the basket market started to slow. Then there was the Great Depression, and who could afford to buy something just pretty? But she hung on to these for a long time and sold them in the 1945 sale. This museum began essentially in 1940, so 10 came to this museum and 10 went to the Historical Society in Reno, which had been in existence already since the 19-teens. So our museum is younger than theirs, I have to admit. And then, since that time, more people have given a little basket here and a little basket there, so that our collection is up to, I forget, 14 or more now. It's pretty amazing how many. We have probably the largest collection of her larger works anywhere in the world. So Margaret Cohn also donated the ledgers and many photographs and scrapbooks. There's some great big scrapbooks full of clippings and things about Dotsolali, and some memorabilia and even a few personal items of Dotsolali's. So this is one of the ones at the Historical Society. I think it's called Lights Reflected. This one, I believe, is called Bright Morning Light. And this one, maybe Men and Chiefs in Compact. I haven't gotten very far into studying their baskets yet. That's another that's up there at the Historical Society. At the Historical Society, you can go in and see their baskets on exhibit in cases the 6 days a week they're open, I believe. I think that's Tuesday through Sunday. Is that right, Bob?
Yes.
Okay. So go visit them. They're quite amazing what they have up there, too. And then here, you can make arrangements for a behind-the-scenes tour with our curator of anthropology, Jean Hattori. So more about that at the end. So this is one of her early ones. This is one of the ones that someone gave the museum separately beyond the 10 that we received in the Margaret Cohn purchase. Dotsolali created about 150 superb large baskets in the 30 years from 1895 to 1925, and produced a lifetime total of more than 300 baskets, and that included minor works, miniatures that she made. Amy Cohn created a miniature collection, and Dotsolali also did simple twined things, not so simple. Her twining is spectacular. It's a different technique, but she made model cradle baskets and quite a lot of other things also. And that was, she would do them while she was working on a very large piece. When you're working that long on a big piece, you get tired of it. Your hands are tired of that same coiling technique, and doing a different technique in a smaller piece that with less detail is a break. So she did quite a few things in the same time she was working on large pieces. This one is LK 101, and this is its ledger entry. It's important to realize that these baskets are creations. They are works of art not made purely for function, but created entirely new. And they're new forms and original designs, not functional for cooking in. Dotsolali's fame and status can be attributed in part to the patronage of Abe and Amy Cohn, but it is most importantly due to her own artistic genius. Other Washoe weavers were her equal in weaving skill and mastered superfine weaving also, but Dotsolali was unique in her design skills. At the Emporium, she saw those baskets from throughout the West, and she later traveled with the Cohns to fairs and demonstrations where she interacted with other native weavers from around the region. And she borrowed and adapted and refined the incurving bowl shape that the Pomo and Maidu baskets had, and turned it into this large degi coop that she created. And other Washoe weavers then adopted this form, and other weavers around the region, Maidu and Miwok weavers also. She borrowed design elements from the neighboring Miwok, and especially the Maidu, This is LK37, made in 1904, and it's called Hunting Game of Air in the Sunshine, which is beautiful. Whether she had anything to do with the naming of this basket or whether it was all Amy Cohn, it doesn't matter because it's beautiful. So this is where you can think about how amazing it is to create that from this little beginning in the center. She had, 6 inches to work out plain, and once she started her pattern, she had to have it perfect. So she conceived of arrangements of the elements to fit and emphasize the shape of her baskets. This is called her scatter pattern. Go back there. And it's adapted from a Maidu style, but perfected, I think, by her. The scatter patterns dominated her work through 1914. She perfected the distribution of the elements and scaling the lower ones near the bottom of the basket smaller, enlarging the elements near the center, and then making them a little smaller again near the top, so that it all fit and created a better perspective, and the spaces between the designs are all perfectly tailored to the basket also. This is the interior. You can see where she's changed colors of willow and redbud and bracken fern. You can see little overlaps. So she didn't try to make her interiors perfect. She was for the outside. She knew people were going to put this up on the mantelpiece. They weren't going to be looking inside it very often. And that's just a nice close-up of it. And this is how she finished this one, with just a simple narrowing down, tapering, and finishing off her stitching at the top. She made several other finishes too, so we'll go on those a little bit later. This one, I believe, is called The Fledglings, around 1900. And another innovation is her elegant vertical columns composed of varying elements. And this may be primarily her own conception. Weavers in the Southern Sierra and the Southern Central Valley of California did baskets with broad vertical bands of designs, but they tended to be only around 4 around a basket. So she put more around the basket, and she also did her narrow at the bottom, widening at the center, and narrowing again at the top, and used her blank space of the plain willow in between to also shape the basket. So it almost makes the basket rounder with her perspective project. It all complements the globe of the basket. This is another one where you can see that they're much narrower at the bottom, and they spread out and narrow down partway at the mouth. I like these big, bold triangles of alternating black bracken fern root and redbud. So she had a variety of starts. She had some with a little bit of an open center. She had this tiny ring that she started, and the one that's sewn over was probably an oval fold that then she covered over the start with. So people try to identify weavers' work by things like their starts and their finishes and how they add and subtract new pieces of weavers. And she just decided to change from time to time, I believe. And so I don't think her starts and finishes are absolutely the thing that you can define a Datsalali basket by. She did this finish, and this finish, and this finish, and this finish. And then she went to another shape for just one or two baskets that she made in this conical shape. So this is coiled, and normally a conical basket is twined. And it, like to carry a load of pinyon pine cones down from the mountains to get the seeds from, you don't want a heavy coiled basket, you want a lightweight open twined basket. So this is just for an artistic feat, but it's very beautiful. This one is called the Talisman. Recent additions to the Nevada State Museum collections include 2 fine coiled baskets from the Bright Holy collection. The Bright Holy family was up at Tahoe. He was a wine steward or something at the Tahoe. And they kind of camped near each other, and she made for them for that family, she made a number of baskets. And a few years ago, that collection got sold and broken up, and our curator of anthropology was able to purchase this beautiful one and this one. And this is a one-rod basket that has an especially beautiful patterning of the increased stitching at the bottom. You can see it inside also. Cool. And then these are the newest additions. The Amy Cohn miniature collection is for sale, and Jean was able to purchase these 2 perfect twined baskets that match together. The one conical basket made essentially like a gathering basket, and the small winnowing tray. They're only about 5 inches high. And so this is the first example of her twined work that this museum has been able to have. If you got to go to the Gatekeepers when the miniature collection was on exhibit, you might have seen more of her twined work, like miniature cradle baskets and other things. So her life cannot have been easy. She lived in a time when her people's land and livelihoods were being taken and destroyed, and they had to survive and adapt. And Datsalali adapted through her art. She's left us the legacy of her mind and spirit expressed in her beautiful baskets, and she and her work are an inspiration to all who see her baskets, that each of us can create something beautiful even in our difficult world. Thank you. Questions?
She never signed her book then? It was just...
No, she didn't make any mark, didn't put a special stitch anywhere, didn't put a bead on anywhere that anyone has ever noticed. But her weaving techniques are fairly distinctive, and there are a few people who can identify her work pretty well. Okay.
Did she make many cooking baskets?
Not after she started working for the Cohns. She probably made cooking baskets in her youth that she really used. And once they started on the fancy baskets, that she probably, except for some miniatures, she probably never made any more of those real working baskets.
Do your baskets, are able to they carry water?
Okay. Baskets holding water work in a couple different ways. Like those water bottles, those are twined and then they are coated with pitch. And she probably made those in her youth also, but I have not seen that she made any later after the getting into the fancy basket production. So cooking baskets are coiled or twined, and Washoe cooking baskets are possibly twined, are coiled more than twined. Paiute cooking baskets, Paiute and Shoshone cooking baskets are often twined. The main thing with that is you weave it really tightly, and then before you go to cook in it, you're going to soak it in water so that all the fibers swell. And then you heat your rocks in the fire, and you put your water and your meal and other things into the basket, and you put your hot rocks in there and you start stirring, and you don't stop stirring, because if your hot rock touches the basket, then the basket's going to burn. So the primary thing is that the basket has been soaked in water, and then as it's used as a cooking basket, the acorn or the pinyon meal, it's not cooked that way, I know, but other seeds and things that would be cooked here in the Great Basin, the meal would start to stick into the basket too, and would add to the waterproofness of it. Does that work?
So, I noticed in your presentation that Gatsalali's name in some places is one word, and in other places is several words. Which is the preferred, or which should it be?
This is your answer here. In the early days, the Cones spelled it out as these separate words, often with dashes between, and they printed it more than one way in that time. And in the last 10 to 20 years, most people working on researching her work have reverted to just going simply and spelling it all as one word. And then there's still the question of whether she would consider that her name or whether she considered herself Louisa Kaiser. So she may have had another Washoe name that she didn't let the Cones know. Who knows? It's a big question of what she would have preferred to be called.
Where was she born? Which colony?
Well, she was not born in any colony. She was born before colonies.
Still.
She may have been born in southern Carson Valley near Sheridan, but I don't think there's an absolute fact on that. I think that's something that some Washoe families might have some information, and it would be good to research with them about where they think she may have come from. So that's the best I know.
Did she ever use pine needle coiling?
Not that I know of. In that miniature collection, she had a number of experimental things, but no pine needle. Pine needle basketry is more of a Euro-American introduction. In that arts and crafts movement, the Euro-American ladies wanted to get to do something too, so someone developed this idea of pine needle baskets, which are really fun to do. But I have not seen anything by her. She did do something in that collection that was not any kind of local material that I recognized at all, but it was not pine needles either.
Was Charlie O'Flynn
first husband?
Was Charlie Kaiser her first husband? Was Charlie Kaiser her first husband? Probably not, but I don't know that for sure either. She was not his first wife. He had at least one other wife before her. And some of the old writings say that she had a husband and a couple of children who passed away, but more recent writings they have not found any records of anything like that. But she did apparently take in the son of her brother when her brother passed away. So she did help raise children. Does that help?
Any idea demographically how big the Washoe population was pre-contact?
No, I don't know that for sure. Probably a lot more than after contact. There was shorthand.
How long would it take to make one of these, say, medium size?
I didn't put those details in the talk. The ledger does have written in it when she started one of these large baskets and other works that she did at the same time and when she finished the basket. The ones that are about yay took 6 months or more to weave.